Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you so much for the beautiful meetings we've had this morning. Um, our Sabbath school was truly a blessing and an inspiration for hope that we can have in Christ, Lord, for all the things we have done. You will forgive and help us to get through and to keep going. And we thank you so much for that peace and hope that we can have in you through this blessing that you've given us, even though we don't deserve it, Lord. Through your grace and forgiveness, we can do all things and get all the way through to the end. We just have to trust in you and hold on to you. We thank you for our prayer meeting, and we thank you for helping us to see the sorrow of our brothers and sisters, Lord, the things they're struggling with. Help us to continue to pray for them and help their situations to be resolved in a wonderful way. And we thank you for the lessons that you teach us through everything we encounter in life. Help us to be patient and willing to learn from these things, and so that it can strengthen us and make us better and move us forward. We pray for a blessing on the meeting we're about to have in the presentation. Help us to continue to understand more and more and to learn more and more. Although these are things we've seen already, we are slow to learn, Lord, and every single one of us struggles with memory issues and different things like that. Help us to see another facet of this message we haven't before, and help us to understand something we didn't before from this presentation. We thank you, Lord, so much for everyone that's able to be here with us, and for Sister Susan, that she can interact more with us. We ask that you please give her balm for her struggle and help her, Lord, through what she's going through, and Sister Anna as well, and continue to help us have a wonderful fellowship today. In the Lord Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Mm-hmm.
Amen. Thank you. This wonderful prayers this morning. Greetings, brothers and sisters. It's been a while, sometime since I last did my last presentation. And I'm going to do a little review, a summary of the last presentation, which was called Idolatry of Conservative Adventism. I'm just going to read the summary that Elder Test wrote that will lead us into this study that I'm going to be doing after, which would be Protestantism Divided. She did this series of a bunch of really good videos, and so I'll start with that. This is the review and the summary of Idolatry of Conservative Adventism. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. We lined up ancient Israel and modern Israel. We saw that the problem with ancient Israel, however it manifested itself, was consistent. Their problem was what they wanted in a king. They tied that king to God, as it was done in Egypt with the Pharaoh and the Apis bull. God wasn't enough, as he was with the judge. They still wanted the characteristics as the Apis bull represented in a nation. Through idolatry, first the golden calf, then asking for a king, then they furthered that at the split of the nation. They set up a calf at the north and south. Then, as they were taken into Babylon, they continued the same idolatry. They come out of Babylon, they lose the idol, but they keep the characteristics of the Apis bull. When they come to the end of their history and Christ descends, they don't see they don't see the Apis bull they wanted, because they kept their characteristics. Instead, they see say that again.
Yeah, did you say that you had no share screen on this one?
Oh gosh,
no?
I forgot about that. Okay, you know what? Let me do that.
I thought maybe I missed it.
I'm so sorry. Okay, let me do this.
I know you said it was a review, and I thought maybe you weren't going to share that part.
Well, okay, which one do I hit? Do I hit my screen, or which screen am I hitting? You know, when
you have to have the file open on your screen.
Okay, I'm going to hit the blue. Do I hit the blue screen? It's like the screen with the zoom.
Well, you have to be in Zoom and have your file open.
I do.
and then click share screen on, and then once you click share screen, look to see that file that
Okay,
shows.
do you guys see anything?
You see Protestantism Divided. Okay. Is this your review?
That's perfect.
Perfect.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, wait, I'm just going to finish this review. There's no slides. I'm just reading right now.
Okay, that's what
okay.
I thought.
I'm just reading the summary, the review from the previous video that came before Protestantism Divided, because I think it would be very, very more understandable. Okay, so they come out of Babylon, they lose the idol, but they keep the characteristics of the Apis bull. When they come to the end of their history and Christ descends, they don't see the Apis bull they wanted because they kept the characteristics. Instead, they see someone meek and lowly, and they were looking for a conqueror, someone with courage and someone with an army. Therefore, they could not recognize their Redeemer, and they failed as a nation. A group was taught through parable teaching to see the nature of the king in a different light. We came down to modern Israel. We showed how we came out of this period of darkness and idolatry, and we also lost the Sabbath. Then God raised up a messenger, William Miller, to draw us out of apostate Protestantism. We looked at what was happening in Protestantism at that time, the political factions between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Within that, you see the two factions of Protestantism, the conservatives led by Jedediah Morse and the liberals led by William Bentley. Liberals supporting Thomas Jefferson, and I would argue that we would take his position today. The Jedediah Morses who supported John Adams, the conservatives, how they supported their ideology with these conspiracy theories, in particular, the conspiracy theory about the continued infiltration of the existence of the Illuminati. We saw how that was not the mindset of our pioneers or our prophet. We have skipped through some history because we have more to study about the Jerry Falwell error, but I just wanted us to look at the quotes that Ellen White speaks about secret societies and how she views what a secret society looks like. How secret is it in reality? What does the secrecy mean? We began to touch on that a little, but we have left some room to develop both our understanding of her writings on secret societies and also what was happening in Protestantism prior to our time of the end that led them to have the conspiracy theories that we're seeing more than ever right now, particularly in the time of the coronavirus, when you have Protestant ministers putting out videos about coronavirus being a cover for 5G networks, all of that coming from Protestantism. Adventism feels peculiar and special because of those views. We don't realize what we have taken on, which is Protestantism. So when she did this study in May, we can see that the conspiracy theories have really gotten worse and worse to the point now where these QAnon and I don't know, all these other conspiratorial groups are arming themselves. They've become militant and they feel justified. And this history repeats. And so I'll use that to go into Protestantism Divided. I want to take a little detour for the first part of today's class and discuss something that seems entirely disconnected. It is in some way disconnected, but when it comes to this subject of parables, literal and spiritual, and conspiracy theories, you really can't separate them. Everything is connected. This is not largely disconnected from where we are heading and what we are trying to understand, but it is foundational knowledge that I think we should all have. And anytime somebody wants to make a statement or ask a question, just go ahead and stop me because I'm going to pause between each slide so that I give people time. I want to give a bit of historical study, just a few minutes or so. It's about what has happened within Islam over the last few decades. This is a major subject and it's very complicated. However, I don't want to give a complicated history. I just want to give a simple review of what's happened over the last 40 years. This will seem disconnected, but it will become clearer perhaps in a small way and will help us as we move forward. So we're going, okay, wait, at the very top, I can't see, how do I bring this? There's like a black bar that's.
You can actually just put your mouse on the top of that black bar and kind of hold it and bring it down. But it probably made you advance your slides because you might not have your.
Put my mouse on the black bar and then what? Oh, okay, well, I'm just gonna move it.
Yeah, and then move it. And then, yeah, because it always covers the top. And I always have to do that too.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so if we're going to understand modern Islam and what has happened to it, can you guys see that black bar?
We can't, but I think you missed still one slide. Wasn't there one before this that we?
Oh gosh, okay. I'm all over here. Okay.
Well, maybe not. Okay, maybe not. If that was the next one, I thought there was some. Never mind. I think
this will seem okay. I want to give a little. Okay, I think I did this one. Okay, so if we're going to understand modern Islam and what has happened to it, you have to go back to the turning point. That was 1979 externally. That's just public knowledge. It's not something peculiar to this movement. They know their turning point was 1979. There were major events in 1979, and one of them was the Iranian Revolution. And I think we all remember the revolution. The Iranian Revolution was a series of events that culminated in the overthrow of Pahlavi dynasty under Shah Muhammad Reza and the replacement of his government with an Islamic republic under the Grand Ayatollah Khomeini, a leader of one of the factions in the revolt. I want to discuss two countries, Iran and Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia and Iran. Before 1979, Iran was ruled by the Shah, and people started to protest his rule because he was quite a dictator. There begins to be civil unrest, and that civil unrest is hijacked by this radical Islamic movement led by the man known as Khomeini. And everything that's underlined has a link if anybody wants to do further research on these issues. He sees himself as this spiritual leader of an Islamic government. And when the Shah is forced out of Iran, he flees or abdicates. Khomeini comes in and takes control of Iran, and he introduces Sharia law. Again, everything that is in this blue and underlined has a link to it. So you can click on it and it takes you to that information. So Iran is quite a progressive country, but with a dictator. This means there is a certain amount of religious tolerance, even though they have a dictator. Church and state are quite separated. So they go from, with the Shah of Iran, the women are pretty free to dress the way they have lots of freedom. And when Khomeini comes in, this is what happens to the women with Sharia law. In the 1979 Iranian Revolution, this new government becomes a church-led government. It was led by clerics. Then Sharia law was introduced. And I found this little graph here. I thought it was kind of good to look at. It shows what Sharia and Sharia law is, the differences. So Sharia, it means divine or immutable, which is not changing, immutable, unchanging. It also means not to be imposed on any unwilling person. Means literal meaning is a path that leads to water. Also means serve to quench one's spiritual thirst. And based on the Quran and the authentic traditions of the Prophet Muhammad. That's what Sharia is. However, Sharia law means not immutable, meaning it can change. And then it means based on Islamic jurisprudence called the fiqh. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly, but it's often described as human understanding and practices of the Sharia, that is human understanding of the divine Islamic law as revealed in the Quran. Sharia law also often refers to as an Islamic law. It is man-made interpretation of the Sharia, The differences across Muslim, and it has differences, it means different things across different Muslim majority states. So in 1979, Iran became a combination of church and state. Some of you are aware of two particular branches of Islam, Shia and Sunni. Iran is Shia. This is a church-state union where the church is in control, and it's the Shia branch of Islam. Now we'll take a look at Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is run by a royal family from generation to generation and is known as the House of Saud, and they are Sunni. However, not just Sunni, it's a branch of Sunni known as Wahhabism. They are a very puritanical sect of Sunnism. Saudi Arabia contains two holy sites. They are Mecca and Medina. These are the two holy sites where Muslims would want to go and pilgrimage. And here's Medina and here's Mecca. There's 200 miles between these two. It's Sunni. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Okay. The Saudi royal family or House of Saud have to justify that their family has the right not just to be the state rulers of Saudi Arabia, but that they also have to justify that they have the spiritual mandate to control the holy sites of Islam. 15,000, that distinction likely goes to the House of Saud, the ruling royal family of Saudi Arabia, comprising of 15,000 family members, although a majority of the wealth is only held by about 2,000 of them. And this is the House of Saud is estimated net worth is 1.2 trillion as of August of 2018. It's quite a family. So this state royal family has to justify their spiritual right to control these holy sites. And what that causes them to do is to go into union with Sunni clerics. So they form their own church and state union with radical clerics, knowing that these radical clerics would justify the royal family's right to rule the holy sites of Islam. So you have a church and state relationship in Iran. It's run by the church and it's Shia. You also have a church-state union in Saudi Arabia that's also controlled by the church, but it's a radical form of Sunnism. The reason that Saudi Arabia went into this church-state relationship is not just about their political rulership, but that their spiritual rulership of these ancient sites were being questioned and threatened by others. So Saudi Arabia finds these clerics or prominent religious leaders who are going to justify Saudi Arabia's right to rule. Those clerics that they go into union with are extremely radical in their viewpoint. This is something we will begin to see that starts to get more and more out of control. This is all the same history in 1979. Now you have this other country, Afghanistan, and we all know what's happening there. There's a civil war, but it was a proxy war between the Soviet Union and the United States. So you have this war in Afghanistan, and we know that the United States was involved in that civil war. They spent approximately $8 billion in Afghanistan to manipulate it to their own advantage. And there's an article that talks about that right here. Saudi Arabia matched the United States with $8 billion that they spent because they were just as interested in Afghanistan. They needed to export their version of Islam, a version that was not extremely popular throughout much of the Islamic world. Wahhabism was not even a majority version of Islam, but it had to be seen as the majority form of Islam to justify the Saudi royal family and their rulership over the holy sites. They can't go straight into Afghanistan because the country is a mess and it's destroyed in civil war. Instead, there's this country that borders it, and that country is Pakistan. And the Wahhabism is an Islamic doctrine and religious movement founded by Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab. It has been variously described as ultra-conservative, far-right, austere, fundamentalist, or Puritan.
And can I comment real quick?
Yes.
Just going back to when we went through all those studies that I did that one on the House of Saud.
Yes.
Wahhab goes all the way back to the beginning. There were three stages, is lack of a better word, I think that's the word, for the House of Saud that they went through. And in the very first stage, when they, the House of Saud first rose up, it was an intermarriage between Wahhab with the Sunnis then, with the king then. And so they've had that relationship back from the very beginning. And that relationship is what kind of caused problems throughout all of history.
Yes, their legacy goes back over 150 years, I think. Wahhabism is named after an 18th century Islamic scholar, theologian, preacher, and activist, Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab. He started a reform movement in the remote, sparsely populated region of Najd, advocating a purging of such widespread Sunni practices as the veneration of saints and the visiting of their tombs and shrines that were practiced all over the Islamic world, but which he considered idolatrous impurities and innovations in Islam. Eventually, he formed a pact with the local leader, Mohammed bin Saud, offering political obedience and promising that protection and propagation of the Wahhabi movement meant power and glory and rule of lands and men. The alliance between followers of Abd al-Wahhab and Muhammad bin Saud's successor, the House of Saud, proved to be a durable one. The House of Saud continued to maintain its political religious alliance with the Wahhabi sect through the waxing and waning of its own political fortunes over the next 150 years, through to its eventual proclamation of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 1932, and then afterwards on into modern times. The majority of Sunni and Shia Muslims worldwide disagree with the interpretation of Wahhabism, and many Muslims denounce them as a faction or a vile sect. Islamic scholars, including those from the Al-Azhar University, regularly denounce Wahhabism with terms such as satanic faith. Wahhabism has been accused of being a source of global terrorism, inspiring the ideology of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, and for causing disunity in Muslim communities by labeling Muslims who disagree with the Wahhabi definition of monotheism as apostates and justifying their killing. It has also been criticized for the destruction of historic shrines of saints, mausoleums, and other Muslims and non-Muslim buildings and artifacts. Pakistan was quite progressive. They were one of the first in the world to elect a woman, which is Benazir Bhutto, as prime minister. At age 35, she was one of the youngest chief executives in the world and the first woman to serve as prime minister in an Islamic country. That was pretty amazing for an Islamic country to have a woman like that. Pakistan was really quite progressive when it came to many of these modern issues until there was an overthrow. Again, this all happened in the same history, and this dictator took control of Pakistan and introduced Sharia law. His name was Zia, and he was a dictator. And again, just like in other countries, what's happening in the Islamic world is this combination of church and state, affecting country by country by country. Zia introduced Sharia law. The people of Pakistan did not want him in power, but he has two important allies because of geopolitically, he's useful to the United States and to Saudi Arabia. The United States and Saudi Arabia holds him in power. The people don't want him. This geopolitical agenda of the United States destroys Pakistan. It's a very sad story. It really destroys the idea of America as being a country that exports democracy. The people of Pakistan back then, before more indoctrination occurred, could have overthrown him. They wanted to overthrow him, but they were being forced under his rule. That is very sad. Now this is Peshawar. The reason the United States wants Zia in power is because he supports their agenda in Afghanistan, and Pakistan borders Afghanistan, and it becomes important to have an ally in the region. They rather support him than risk having a new government that might support the Soviet Union. They will hold this dictator in power, and he just destroys the country. There's this town in Pakistan called Peshawar. It's this city just across the border from Pakistan. Peshawar becomes an extremely important place. This is where the headquarters of the leaders of the Mujahideen, who fled into exile from Afghanistan, and they all headed to Peshawar. Hundreds of thousands of refugees from Afghanistan all head to Peshawar, and Saudi Arabia sees an opportunity. What they are going to do is give massive discounts from all flights from Saudi Arabia to Peshawar. They're going to send to this town both fighters to support the war in Afghanistan and radical Muslim clerics to support their version of Islam. And the Mujahideen is the plural form of mujahid, the Arabic term for one engaged in jihad. The English term jihadist grammatically corresponds to it. Remember, this isn't just about wanting to convert people. This is to justify their state rule. So they'll send all these radical clerics to Peshawar, and then they're going to create hundreds of schools along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Hundreds of Islamic schools run by the most radical Islamic clerics to indoctrinate the Mujahideen fighters, to indoctrinate the refugees, the children of fighters, the children of the refugees, and even the local Pakistan population, which were not Wahhabi Sunnis, and indoctrinate them with radical Sunni Wahhabism. These radical clerics do a very good job. This is what becomes the students of these schools who are created and funded by Saudi Arabia along the Afghan-Pakistan border. The students of these schools later become the leaders of the Taliban, the leaders of many of those organizations, in particular, the Taliban. Saudi Arabia built hundreds of religious seminaries along that Afghanistan border, and the seminaries had to favor the fundamentalist school of thought that was closely to Saudi Puritanism. This indoctrination caused this radicalization of the area, and some of the graduates became the founders of the Taliban. Out of these schools also would rise Al-Qaeda. Insurgents in border area of Zabul province in Afghanistan, over the years, wealthy Saudi sheiks and philanthropists have stoked the war by privately financing the Taliban and other hardline Sunni groups. One fellow moved to Peshawar. He was one of the early ones, Abdul Yusuf Azam, and he's known as the father of global jihad. This fellow is a Sunni Islamic scholar who preached both defensive and offensive jihad by Muslims to support the Mujahideen in the battle against the Soviet Union. He moves to Peshawar and sends for a friend of his to come and join him. And those two men worked together for years up until this father of global jihad, Abdul Yusuf Azam, is assassinated. So he called his friend to come and join him in Pakistan because we have a work to do. And that friend is called Osama bin Laden. So you have Abdullah and Osama bin Laden, and they become the co-creators of Al-Qaeda. Out of Peshawar arise the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And it's not just these, it's the whole of radical Islam, across the region. These are just two movements that grow out of that radicalization. This has all been purposely and intentionally both encouraged, orchestrated, and funded by Saudi Arabia. 9/11 attack. If we skip some years, we come down to 9/11, September 11th, 2001. And we have this attack on the United States. And there are 19 terrorists that are known to have orchestrated that attack. Of those 19 terrorists, one is from Egypt, one is from Lebanon, 2 are from United Arab Emirates, and 15 are from Saudi Arabia. Why? Church and state relationship. The problem with Saudi Arabia, with what Saudi Arabia has done, and to some degree still continues to do in order to justify their own rule over Mecca and Medina, they went into a church and state relationship, and they were forced to fund and encourage the most radical of clerics. Even when their own people did not originally hold to their radical viewpoint, they had to export this radical version of Islam. The problem with that is that they tend to lose control of their own projects. And here's an article that I enclosed that I'm just going to read an excerpt. It's a very good one. Saudi Arabia is an example of a country with zero separation between church and state. The government is an Islamic monarchy. The government has promised the safety of those who are not Muslims practicing their faith privately in their own homes, but publicly it is against the law. Failure to comply is punishable by fine, lashing, torture, deportation, imprisonment, and or death. Since the Muslim population is 90%, most Arabians do not wish for a government where church and state are separated from one another. The similarities with Saudi royal family and Donald Trump. So if you were to imagine Saudi Arabia, that royal family is much like a Donald Trump. They hold to a version of Islam, and they support a version of Islam that's extremely puritanistic and fundamentalist. But the royal family themselves aren't all that moral, much the same way you see Donald Trump today. For example, they like sport, and a real fundamentalist Muslim would not support any form of sport. It is a sin. But they like their sport, and they refuse to outlaw their sport. They will arrest and imprison clerics that speak against their favorite sport. The Saudi royal family themselves are not very moral, just like Donald Trump, but they've been forced to go into union with radical Islam. What can happen is these terrorist organizations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda can recognize that they don't like the Shia faith and they don't like the West, but they also recognize that they don't like the Saudi royal family either, and they lose control of their own projects. I'm not suggesting that the Saudi Arabian government themselves and the leaders orchestrated the 9/11 attacks, but they did create the environment. A similar thing happened with ISIS. So you have these two sides, the Shia sect of Islam and the Sunni sect of Islam. And there's this article, and the article shows, it's a good article, you might want to take a look at it, and it shows that Saudi Arabia is building this huge, what is it, like a sport coliseum, or it's a sport academy, and they predict in a couple of years that it's expected to become one of the largest sporting academies in the world over the next few decades, because they really like their soccer sport thing. Okay, hold on. Move this there. If we could just give a parable to sort of imagine, or to make this easier to perhaps conceptualize. Iran is a church-state government. if we're going to bring that to Christianity and away from Islam, we can say that Shia Islam is a lot like Catholicism. The way they are like Catholicism is that Shiites really like their history and they like their shrines. So if there's a tomb that belongs to the father-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, a Shia will restore that tomb. They will redecorate it, and then they will go to that tomb and worship at it to honor the father-in-law of Muhammad. They really like their relics. Sunnis are more like Protestants. So the Shia sect is more in line with Catholicism, and the Sunni sect is more in line with Protestantism. The Sunnis see the Shiites as idolaters because they believe that when Shiites honor these shrines and decorate these tombs, that they travel to these tombs, to these places to offer their prayers. They see that as idolatry or creating idol worship. So these Shiites see these Sunnis as idolaters. The Shiites get angry at the Sunnis because the Sunnis keep destroying their cultural sites. For example, the House of Saud has rulership over Mecca and Medina. They keep it nice. They turn it into a tourist attraction, but there's a lot about these cultural sites that they've also destroyed. They see it as idolatry, to keep on holding up the tombs of the Prophet Muhammad's family, etc. So they will destroy some of those cultural sites and not try to preserve them. These two sects of Islam can really fight over these cultural sites. It makes it much more of a tense argument. What was ISIS doing that was upsetting everyone globally? They travel around their portion of the Middle East, and what do? They bring in equipment like bombs, and they would just decimate cultural sites that have existed for thousands of years, going back to the days of Babylon. They would just decimate everything, and they would take archaeologists and historians who worked at those sites, who preserved those sites, and they would publicly execute them. They made a big point of destroying any type of history or culture that had been preserved across the Middle East. They destroyed thousands of years of these ancient sites that had been preserved. The reason they did that is because ISIS belonged to the Sunni sect, and those cultural sites were seen as either being used for idolatry or encouraging idolatry. And I just think that that's such a shame. In an Al-Hayat film documenting the destruction at the Mosul Museum and in Nineveh, one militant states, "The Prophet Muhammad shattered the idols with his own honorable hands when he conquered Mecca. The Prophet Muhammad commands us to shatter and destroy statues. This is what his companions did later on when he conquered the lands." Out of this work of Saudi Arabia came Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, ISIS, and the 9/11 attacks. This isn't something that could have come from Iran. Iran is also radical. If you want to see what a Shia terrorist organization looked like, look up Hezbollah. Some of you may be familiar with Hezbollah in Lebanon. They are Shia. There are other radical terrorist organizations that come from the Sunni sect. And that's why, as close as the United States is with Saudi Arabia because of geopolitical interests against Iraq, against the Soviet Union, because of oil for various reasons, much of this comes down to either power or money. This is where radical Islam has come from, in the way that it threatens the West today, even though Iran also subscribes to Sharia law. What I want us to do is just have a basic overview of how this developed since 1979. It's really two revolutions, a revolution in Iran that's obvious and easy to see, but there's also a revolution that's occurred in Saudi Arabia that was much more obscure. It was the combination of church and state that happened in Saudi Arabia and was then exported across the Middle East that gave rise to the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, etc. I just find it interesting that it's so popular in the West to look at Iran as the threat, and they don't realize that their threat for the last 40 years has largely come from Saudi Arabia. And this is really amazing. Saudi Arabia is really good in keeping that a real secret. Are there any questions or any comments or anything in the chat?
Sister Elaine put in a comment. 2 decades after his death, Saud's son, Muhammad ibn Saud, died in 1765, made his historic pact with Muhammad ibn Abdul al-Wahhab, who died in 1792, leading to their conquest of Arabia and the first Saud state. Sheikh Muhammad's patronymic, Ibn Saud, eventually gave the clan its name, Al Saud. Shia and Sunni Islam are the 2 major denominations of Islam. They chose sides following the death of the Islamic prophet Muhammad in AD 632. Sunnis believe that Muhammad's successor should be Abu Bakr and Omar, and the Shias believe that his successor should be Ali.
Yeah, that's real good information.
Yeah.
Okay. Just like the people are looking at the Catholic world and forgetting the Protestant world, where their threat actually came from. That was nowhere more obvious than at 9/11, where 15 of those 19 terrorists were Saudi Arabian. The alleged Saudi role in September 11 attacks gained new attention after 2 former US senators, co-chair of the Congressional Inquiry into the 9/11 attacks, told CBS in April 2016 that the redacted 28 pages of the Congressional Inquiry report referred to evidence of Saudi Arabia's substantial involvement of the execution of the 9/11 attacks. There are still many open questions about how much certain government officials in Saudi Arabia knew and how much funding and encouragement they gave to that initiative. Much of that has been redacted and held back to preserve this alliance between the United States and Saudi Arabia. As I said, the House of Saud needed to justify their rule to engage in these projects, but they are in regular danger of losing control of them because of their own immorality, if I can put it that way. It becomes important to know these histories because if someone were to throw out a quote, say someone like Walter White, if he were to throw out a quote like, Islam cannot be responsible for 9/11, and I'll tell you why, because I've traveled from the north to the south and from the south to the north of Syria before their civil war, and it was a backward, ignorant country. They can't be responsible for the 9/11 attack. When Walter White makes that kind of statement, which he did in 2018, what's the first thing you should question? First thing that comes on my attention is that regardless of how he thinks or what his personal morality is, the statement is racist. The words, the message is racist, regardless of the man. To say that Syria was too backward and ignorant, that is my paraphrase of his statement. He says it in a much more harder to identify fashion, but there's a problem with that. He's identifying Syria. He's traveled through Syria and said, in essence, it's too backward, too ignorant. They could never orchestrate and fund something like 9/11. Therefore, it could not have come from radical Islam. Is Syria predominantly Sunni or Shia? Is Assad Sunni or Shia? Assad is Shia. The whole house of Assad is Shia. It's a Shia country. In their civil war, who's going to support Assad and who's going to support the rebels? Iran will support Assad, and Saudi Arabia will support the rebels because Iran is supporting another Shia country. Iran is united with Russia, which is also another ally of Assad in Syria. So they work together. The United States is allied to Saudi Arabia. They'll support the rebels. Again, behind it all, it has the same sectarian rift within Islam. The 9/11 attacks were never going to come from Syria. It's a Shia stronghold, and Shiites are directly opposed to Sunniism. Sunniism is where you find Al-Qaeda. Saudi Arabia and 15 of the 19 terrorists, not one of those terrorists were even Syrian. The money did not come from Syria. They were never funded by Assad. There is no connection between 9/11 and Iran or Syria. So the statement itself is just on the most basic level, ignorant of the Middle East. We're going to come back later towards the end of our presentation, but for sure it will be next week that we'll be looking at some of the viewpoints of Walter Veith. I just want us to have a little bit of a view of history itself, just how many layers of wrong there are in the statements that he makes. In order to see the wrong, we need to have a basic overview of what happened here. Who does Walter Veith say was responsible for 9/11, for the 9/11 attacks? Does anybody know who Walter Veith actually said was responsible for the 9/11 attack? Back in a quote in 2018, which we'll come back to, he starts to say sarcastically about how people will say, oh, it wasn't Islam, it was the Zionists. And then Walter Veith will say, well, it's not really the Jewish Jews, it's the Jews that are controlled by the papacy. So underneath all that, if I can cut out the noise, he's saying it was the Jews. And there was someone who would agree with him. Who do you think agreed with what he said, that it was the Jews? Anybody take a guess? In 2002, the Interior Minister of Saudi Arabia said, it was impossible that 15 Saudis could have participated in 9/11. He said it was a Zionist conspiracy, quoting him, we still ask ourselves, who has benefited from 9/11? I think it's the Jews, the antagonists. Saudi Arabia is certainly happy for that. I'm trying to move this thing on. For that viewpoint, that it was the Jews that were responsible for 9/11. But there's absolutely no evidence for that. It was a deflection from their own responsibility for the attack.
Maybe our lack of answer is the fact that we're forgetting these things that we need to forget anyways.
Yeah.
Because I know I watched Walter Veith back in the day as well. And
yeah.
You're asking this question, I was trying to think, and it's like, I'm thinking, well, praise the Lord. Being left from my memory.
I know. And this also, again, it supports the fact that he's kind of racist.
Yeah.
Is not first it was the Syrians they're not intelligent enough and they're a backward country, and now it's the Jews. I mean, he's racist.
Yeah.
This was a bit of a diversion from our study to just have an overview of what's happening in the Middle East over the last 40 years. It's a big subject, and we just want to break down the two branches of Islam, Shia and Sunni. They have become church-state unions in two countries in the Middle East that have engulfed the rest of that region in proxy wars ever since, destroying vast areas of the Middle East outside their own countries, from Lebanon to Syria to Pakistan. One is Shia and one is Sunni. Both are quite radical and both believe in Sharia law. Saudi Arabia saw an opportunity with the Afghanistan civil war, along with the United States backing to become involved in that war, to export their radical version of Islam. Through their clerics and the hundreds of church-state schools along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. They would recruit and indoctrinate both the Mujahideen fighters and the refugees along with their children. It all particularly centers around this one town in Peshawar. Out of Peshawar come two leaders who unite Azam, the father of modern jihad, who then calls his friend in Peshawar, Osama bin Laden, and they unite and become the two co-founders of Al-Qaeda. Azam was assassinated in 1989, but before that, he had already had a falling out with Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden wanted to take this new movement and expand it internationally. Azam wanted to keep it within Pakistan and Afghanistan because he didn't see the benefit of this international expansion. So they come to an early disagreement. However, Azam is assassinated and Osama bin Laden takes Al-Qaeda internationally. From the fomenting of radical Islam, there is a radical transformation across many countries in the Middle East, from Egypt all across the Middle East, and much of it happened because Saudi Arabia tends to lose control of their projects. Also in Peshawar history, you find other men who became the founders and leaders of what became ISIS. But there are many more players than just Osama bin Laden. Out of that same petri dish came ISIS and many other separate terrorist organizations that slowly morphed and developed into ISIS. But this was a Saudi Arabian project, a union of church and state. We describe it as Catholic versus Protestant. If you hadn't gone back into the Middle Ages, you would have seen a very similar dynamic. You would have a Catholic Church state union and a Protestant church state union, and they're going to fight for the expansion of their influence throughout Europe. That's what happened in the Middle East, and that is why the Middle East is in the mess it is today. It's not because they're just violent people, and it's not because they're just a violent religion. You could say that exact same thing of Christianity in the 1260. You would have seen the same thing because it was the same thing. All the Middle East has is that same church-state mess that we had in the 1260. These two opposing sides, both in church and state unions, are going to continue to attack each other through their different proxies across the Middle East, outside their own national borders. Iran is by no means bearing the majority of the guilt for that. Much falls on Saudi Arabia. And you know, you would never know that. In the world, Iran is like the demonic, faction with all this Middle East. In actuality, it's Saudi Arabia funding all this, fueling all this. Yeah. Through their church and state, ultra-conservative religion. Did anyone want to say something?
No, hey, Sister Donna, I just, my husband, he's watching this too, and he's like, oh, did you know the flag of Saudi Arabia, what does it say? So if you compare the flag of Saudi Arabia versus the flag of Iran, you can already see, because flag of Saudi Arabia, it says there is no God under this, except for basically Muhammad is his prophet, except Allah and Muhammad his prophet. And the ISIS flag says has an inscription. So what you're seeing there, it's the ISIS flag, right?
Yes.
And you compare, so they are kind of similar. But if you compare it against Iran's flag, and
it's
then
totally different.
Yes, it's totally. It does have. It has no religious inscription. It's just green and red and white, and some decorations. Which is
it shows you how it's like Saudi Arabia is underneath this flag, but nobody associates ISIS with Saudi Arabia. They just don't know. They've done a good job, I tell you. I mean, anyway, the good input. Thank you, Lana. Anybody else? Okay. again, it's not because they necessarily just believe in Sharia law any more than Donald Trump is a really good Protestant. This has become politically necessary for them to do. If we can just have an overview of what happened there, a minute you hear a quote by someone like Walter Weiss, you can immediately see the vast gaping holes in his argument. The minute he says terrorism couldn't come from the Middle East because I went to Syria and it was really backwards, you can see the layers of problems. Syria is Shia. It does not subscribe to the ideologies held by Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, or ISIS. See, this is what they don't understand. Syria is Shia. But again, most people don't understand what's going on, the Shia and the Sunni thing. They just look at it as a bunch of crazy people. But they don't understand, the differences between the two religions. Now we can look at it. We can look at it as Catholicism, a difference between Catholicism back in the 1260 and Protestants, how they were fighting. This is why when ISIS goes into a new territory, the first thing they are going to do is round up and slaughter every Shia they can find. It's convert or we will kill you. They've killed more Muslims than they've ever killed non-Muslims. They will kill anyone who is an idolater or a Shiite. And so I kind of had this vision when I see the kings, the Saudi Arabian kings, when they're shaking hands with, presidents of America, this president of America, and they're, with George W. Bush, they were like buddies. And I mean, it's horrible. I mean, these people are they're merciless.
That was one from the studies that we did previously. That was one of the things that caused Al-Qaeda and all them to rise up, is because the Saudis always had that relationship with the United States way back in the 30s when it came to oil. Mm-hmm. And they never liked that relationship with the West. But I don't remember all the specifics. I'd have to go back and review the studies, but I think it was when they went into Kuwait, because bin Laden offered to go and take care of what went on in Kuwait. And the Saudis said no and let the United States come in there. And that really ticked them off. And that's what started to rise all the terrorist groups when the Saudis let them in there. But because they always had that relationship with the Wahhabs, that it was a constant pull, that the Saudis kind of were in the middle. They wanted those of the West, and they even like to live somewhat like the West. We saw that in some of those studies. But they always had to work with the Sunnis as well, this extreme religious sect of them. And so, yeah, and that's what's caused problems in the Middle East with the United States being over there, in there with them.
Right. And, if we can just, they're no different than what happened in the 1260. I mean, the Catholics were just as brutal, if not more.
Yeah.
And now we see the outward expression of hatred and violence now coming from, in our country now, coming from the ultra-conservative right Protestants, evangelicals. We see this dynamic happening, and it's pretty prophetic. I mean, I believe that what happened on Wednesday was very prophetic, and it's God in His providence is showing the world. In His providence,
it was a warning.
Yes, it was.
Your warning.
It was necessary for that to happen before Donald Trump's final departure, because this is letting the world know, or at least America know too, that we can't have this man again.
And so many people are steeped in conspiracy theories, and God is using ways to wake people up out of those conspiracy theories and come to consensus.
But you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I was reading that right now they're also looking into the inside, whether it was staffers or the police. Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because they saw some police officers taking pictures and selfies and things with them.
Yeah.
Okay. Before people like Walter Veith want to make that sound racist, they should look back into the 1260 and see that Christianity did the exact same thing. It's the inevitable danger of any church-state union. We just witnessed that. What do these people on Wednesday want? They want a church-state union, and they will kill. And if they, I mean, there's some of them. They had, you saw that they had Molotov cocktails. They had, machine guns, and I mean, what were they? Were they just carrying that for no reason? No, they were going to use that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a comment to make, Sister
Yes.
Donna.
Yes.
I was just reading, came up on an alert, but Alex Jones, who's one of the biggest conspiracy theories here in America,
Oh, yeah.
he was in cahoots with Trump, and he was to lead a section of people right to the White House. Yes. And so, he's one of the biggest conspiracy theories.
He is. Here in America. He made it popular. Yep. He made it popular. I remember there was a time when I was watching him, and then I thought to myself, this guy's he's kind of radical, Very
radical. Yeah. In fact, he contributed $500,000 towards this.
Wow.
Yeah. Put up his money. And when they got in, when he saw that they were going, marching into the White House, he pulled back and stood his ground. But he's playing both sides underneath.
Yeah.
But he has definitely got a huge following of people that listen to him. So, it's that element is there, and it just spurs it on more and more.
I mean, the only word that I can think of is delusional. That's the only word that's the only word that can describe people like that. They're seeing what's not there, but they see what they want to see. It's like,
there's a lot of money behind it too, and notoriety. If they could be in connection with political people, and Donald Trump especially, it makes them feel like they've got a lot of power.
Right.
What's really interesting about that too, you're talking about the Atlantic article, I think, right?
Yeah. Although it didn't come up in that article, but the Atlantic has got a bunch of news that they're putting out there now.
I just read that article that Sister Elaine, you told her, that was an excellent article.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about, I'm picturing, because I have family that are Trump supporters. And, my family, I'm the only Christian. None of them have anything to do with church. They're like what I was before I came here. They believe there's a God, and they believe but they don't know anything. They make no practice, nothing. You know what I mean? Nothing. And so a lot of those people that claim that all of this was about God, they're going out there with nothing. I don't know how else to say it. I just think about where I was at. And so it's not like you've got your church going Christians, maybe some of them are, that went and did that. There probably are some that went and did that, but a lot of them are not,
Yeah.
They claim it, but they don't know anything.
Right.
And they're just going by what they've seen and what they've been fed.
Exactly.
I just think about it because I know where I came from, with no religion whatsoever, and but believing that there is a God, and I think about when the Jehovah's Witnesses used to come to my door, and I just barely began reading the Bible, and I was thinking, I'm wanting to be a Christian. I should listen to these guys and hear what they have to say, and I would go and compare, but none of my family knows anything, but they claim that they have, like my one sister, oh yeah, God is in my heart. I know he's in my heart. And so nobody has to tell her anything. And she mentioned to me a while back in a conversation that she has been looking into wanting to better understand what the Bible said. And I said, so where are you going to find your information? Well, I don't want to talk about that right now. That was her response. I don't want to talk about that right now.
Right.
And so a lot of these people are going out there under delusions, and they have no concept.
Right.
I mean, maybe not all of them. I'm not saying all of them, but
yeah.
So, and Sister Oni's got a question, but I don't remember this either. I've been racking my brains and trying to look up information while Sister Donna's presenting them. When it came to the Sunni and Shia, I was trying to go through some old studies, or is there one that's conservative and one that's liberal? And I think within each they have each, but I don't remember.
Yeah, they do.
Within, it's just like with us, just like Adventism, you have both sides. Just with Catholicism, you have both sides. I think probably, and I don't know if I remember for sure, but in Shia you have both sides, and in Sunni you have both sides.
Right, but we remember now Sunni, the Saudi Arabia is Sunni.
Right.
So they are ultra radical. Wahhabism is ultra radical, and a lot of Muslims think of Wahhabism as evil and satanic.
Yeah.
So it's not something.
And one of the other questions that came up is, about where they live. And I was going to put it in the chat, but I thought, no, I'll just leave that out. But I'll go ahead and say it, that because I remember from the studies that Syria does have a small population of Sunnis. And then also in Saudi Arabia, there's a small population of Shias. And you also have that dynamic in Iraq, which is what causes a lot of when we went through those studies, causes a lot of their problems. And I know I don't remember the details. I'd have to go back to the study when it came to I can't think of his name, Saddam Hussein as well, because he was Sunni and he was afraid the Shias were going to come in, and after the revolution, he was afraid that the Shias were going to come in and overtake the population. Yeah.
Yeah. They're real, I mean, it's a real enemy. It's a real, they fear one another. It's really kind of sad, really, but.
Hopefully that answered Sister Oni's question the best that we could at this time.
Okay.
Sister Elaine, that article, you printed part of it from the Atlantic. I think, unless it was another article, but they had written 3 or 4 different articles on the breakdown of what they see happening now. A lot of facts there with the Christian element of the evangelicals.
I read the one with at the end, Rick Warren makes a comment, and it's absolute, that he doesn't condone it, and he actually because Rick Warren is he calls himself conservative, but he's actually not. He's, as a Christian, he's actually very liberal. He was the one that
he's an evangelical.
Yeah, he's an evangelical, but he was the one that did the prayer for Barack Obama when Barack Obama was inaugurated. So Rick Warren is actually quite liberal. And he's never been into all this stuff that's going on, that the evangelicals he's never been a supporter of it. And so you don't hear him talk about it very much.
Yeah, that article brings out about Charles Stanley too.
Oh, what is Charles Stanley? I didn't see that article.
Yeah, that's in the Atlantic. They've got a couple of articles.
What did Charles
It'd be worthwhile to really read those. Well, Charles Stanley's son Charles Stanley he's semi-retired now anyway. He's up there in age. Yeah. His son is in his 60s.
Yes.
And he has avoided all of this.
Yeah, because he
said that he could see that this, and he has a mega church.
Yes, he does.
I think he's Southern Baptist.
Yes.
He said he could see this coming a mile away, and he said he avoided it.
Yeah.
I was really happy to hear that, because I used to listen to Charles Stanley, his dad, on the radio.
Too. I used to love Charles Stanley.
Yeah.
And his son came to Saddleback, because I used to go to Saddleback. So Saddleback, which is Rick Warren, and Charles Stanley. I mean, I'm sorry, and his son. I forget what was his first name. Anyway,
Charles is.
They're all in the same mindset. They're very liberal. They're liberal.
Yeah, very.
Yeah.
Very liberal, and they're scattered in there. And these people I see, they will come out, probably more too.
Yeah.
once they're seeing this, especially looking at what's happened now, they see the end result of what was coming.
But what they should be doing is not coming out when everybody else is coming out, and they should be, they're Christians, they should be voicing objections with what the right side is doing. They have an obligation, you know.
Yeah, they do.
But they're too afraid to do that.
They've been silent.
They've been silent, and they should not. They have a responsibility to voice they have a massive amount of people. These are mega churches. If their pastors just stood up and said, this is wrong, but they don't want to. They don't want to do it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, come out now that the whole world is against Donald Trump, but were they coming against Donald Trump before? No, they weren't. Exactly. They weren't saying anything.
Well, plus their followers, you know, even though they weren't standing up preaching for Donald Trump and what he was doing, they, just by their silence, they were condoning it.
Yes. Yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly.
But remember, there is a time for them.
Yeah.
Because Sister White says that churches in front with their pastors would come out.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
They are the Nethinims.
So this is a great opportunity for people to come out, because people are seeing now. This is huge in the minds and hearts of people. Just like Sister Adriana just said now a while ago, that people who are conservative that she knew are actually rethinking their position.
Yeah, it's the purpose of it all. God's allowing it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, keep in mind always the agricultural model that they're plowing and seed sowing and all of that is coming from the external events. So this is an external event that is latter rain for the Levites and former rain for the Nethinims. It's meant to prepare their hearts to receive the gospel.
Yes. This is going to be really good for us toward the end of the year.
Well, yeah.
It's getting better. I mean,
but there's a lot of people that are going to fight against and you know, the worst are going to be the Seventh-day Adventists from when we get there. Whether they will hear or whether they will forbear. And so we need that forehead of flint to be able to take that opposition when we get it and be, as we were studying in Desire of Ages, what Christ was in always answering. You know, he lived it. He lived it. And that's why it's so important. And I've heard Elder Tess say this. It is so important that we live it.
Yes.
We have to live what we are professing.
You're right.
Because they have to see that in us. And when we were reading through Desire of Ages, we see how did he do it? He never attacked what they were doing and about. He just justified by thus saith the Lord. He gave scripture for the reason of why he was doing what he was doing. And it was up to them to, you know, whether they were going to be convicted on it or not. The Holy Spirit would strive with hearts, you know what I'm saying? But but it's still up to them.
Yes.
So the Lord is allowing these things to happen as part of their reign to prepare their hearts to receive the gospel and giving them a contrast. Because that article in the Atlantic, it's like the people are beginning to see a they're seeing the wickedness of the church. Babylon has fallen, right? They're seeing the wickedness of it, and then they're going to see the contrast.
Yes. And, you know, my husband and I, we're going to be doing the next study on Wednesday, and it's about who rules the world.
Mm-hmm.
And when you understand that whole thing, you realize that God is in control of all governments, and all rulers. He appoints the rulers. He also takes them out. He is in control of rulers of the world and governments of this world.
Mm-hmm. And he allowed Donald Trump. Amazing. He allowed Donald Trump for this time, for this work.
Yes. And you know, he put him in for purpose, okay, because he's got all his following and he's got these people, you know, they're all in their own mindset. And now he's going to use them. God is going to use Donald Trump to now put a question in front of every person. Now they're going to have to choose. They're going to have to choose what side. And no greater, I mean, it's absolutely perfect. No, I mean, Donald Trump was a perfect example of this radicalness, this mindset, is this derangement, this delusional mindset. You couldn't have used anybody else. I mean, he's perfect.
It still makes me sad that a person can get to that level. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That he can't be reached. I was thinking about that this morning, that, you know, who's he had around him, praying with him and for him, all those that had fed him. They fed him this stuff. Yeah, they fed him all of this stuff, and he was already primed for it, and they fed him. So, you know, I was just thinking about it this morning, about the Lord perhaps sending somebody like a Moses, somebody there, you know, whether he would hear or not, you know what I mean? But think about the condition. I mean, he's a human being just like us, brought in to this world and shaped and molded for what he's become, and how far he's gone. It's you know, and then all those people that believe and follow him, it's sad.
Well, look at Nebuchadnezzar. So, I mean, there's always hope for no matter who you are. Even Donald Trump, there's always hope. But I just, you know, and we of course we pray for everybody, but at some point in time, God will give you over to your reprobate mind.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. So everybody's got to make a choice.
And those that are, you know, back in 1844, when it said they were praying to Satan, you know, that's what you have today. These people that are praying to Satan and don't even know it. And those are the ones that have been praying with and for Donald Trump, that he's their Cyrus.
Right.
So took this already what's the word? Egotistical? Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Man, and then just exploded it. And it's demonstrating the fall of Babylon, if I understand it correctly. It's demonstrating that, you know, preparing people to hear that Babylon has fallen.
Right. And it's not just in America. I mean, the whole world is looking at this.
It is, and that's the point.
Yes. This is worldwide.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to next week's study, because I'm working on the slideshow for it, because I wanted to go back to the revolutions, and Elder Tess did one that followed the ones that Sister Sue Ellen and Brother Jim did, called The Lines of the Revolutions. So I've been working on that one. It's been really helpful. But it's noted that it was, you know, back in the days of the Millerites, it was local. It was United States, localized with the United States. It wasn't worldwide. And now it is worldwide. Everybody is seeing it worldwide.
That's how you know it's prophetic.
Right.
The Prime Minister of Scotland has said right on TV, "You're not welcome. Your plane will not be allowed to land in Scotland, even though you have a little yard over here. You're not allowed."
Oh yeah, because he wants to go golf during the inauguration. I had heard rumors of.
Yeah.
She said no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good conversation. Good dialogue. Good. If we just go back to that one quote by Walter Weiss, when he goes into Zionism and the Rothschilds and the Illuminati, we will review it next week. I just wanted us not so much to talk about Walter Weiss, but to just see the steps that Islam has taken over the last 40 years in the Middle East, church and state issues that they are facing. Many of you are familiar with the name Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist that was killed. You can place this at the top of Saudi Arabian government, that they killed him a couple of years ago. In the late 1970s, early 80s history, he traveled to that town of Peshawar and he interviewed Osama bin Laden. When you talk about Jamal Khashoggi and the reason that Saudi Arabia had killed him, he knows the history. He knows the guilt that the royal family bears. What they actually did was export radical Islam. His mistake was that he would speak about it. So there's someone that interviewed Osama bin Laden back in the beginning story. If you see what he knows and what he spoke about, you'll understand why the House of Saud wanted him dead and why they had him assassinated. There's a documentary out on Prime, Amazon. I don't know if anybody has them. It's called The Kingdom of Silence. It's a very good documentary with a really good producer, Emmy Award winning, and did a wonderful document. Well, not wonderful, but it was a good document about what happened, the whole situation with Jamal Khashoggi. And it was pretty sad. He was, you know, like royalty with the royal family. He was in with them, and he was a journalist at the, you know, Washington Post. So he had a lot of, you know, clout. And he started to see after the Arab Spring that happened in Egypt.
Yeah.
He started to, his heart started softening. He started to see, you know, there needs to be freedom. People need a choice, and they need to be able to have a voice. And there's another documentary on Netflix called The Square, and that's all about the Arab Spring in Egypt at that time. And so his heart started to turn, and so he started talking about, you know, the people having more freedom and things, and that just, and so it was, I think Saudi Arabia was the one that was supporting that coup, you know, against the people, the Arab Spring. They supported, financially supported the you know, the backwash, because the people were there, and they came out, and just so many people. And it was so sad that it was turned down. I mean, they were pushed back, and then another dictator was put into power. It was just horrible. But those people were so amazing because they were ready for change. They were Christians and Muslims sitting together, loving each other, caressing each other, and just, you know, feeding one another. And it was a unity, and they wanted that. And that was crushed by Saudi Arabia's mercenaries that they sent in there. You know, so anyway, these two documentaries are really good. You guys have that chance to do that. Coming back to our subject of last week, we'll put Islam and all of that to one side for a moment. Last week, we spoke about ancient Israel and modern Israel. We'll review that, then we'll continue on. We've seen that we can compare and contrast ancient Israel, that was the Jewish nation. They were to spread the knowledge of God through the known world, and this was in anticipation of Christ's first advent. Then we have modern Israel, and then Adventism, which also had the instruction to spread the knowledge of God throughout the world, and that was in anticipation of Christ's second advent. So in the last 6,000 years, you have these two peoples that God has raised up to do a specific work: ancient Israel and modern Israel. Jewish nation and Adventism. What we were doing is we were comparing and contrasting these two. Okay. Classic rules of parable teaching. As we do this, there's quite a few neat points that Brother Brandon discussed this morning, if you were there for that class, particularly when we talk about parables. And as we begin with the history of Egypt, there's some good points in there that should already be in our minds. We compare and contrasted ancient and modern, and we work through the history of the ancient. We see that the beginning of this ancient history was at the end of the time prophecy, the 400-year time prophecy that Israel was to spend in Egypt. We find that they had been in darkness. They had been in captivity, and they lost the Sabbath. We brought that down to modern Israel, 1260 years. We're also seeing that modern Israel begins at the end of the time prophecy. We can speak about a number, but we'll speak about the 1260. It was 1260 years of darkness, of captivity, and of God's people had lost the Sabbath. So there we go. We're here. God's people losing the Sabbath. In ancient Israel, God is going to draw his people out from the nations around them, particularly from Egypt. So there's darkness, there's captivity, and they lost the Sabbath, the sight of the Sabbath. God was to raise up a messenger. This is Moses. Modern Israel, he raised up a messenger, that was Miller, to lead his people out of Egypt, and Miller to lead his people out of apostate Protestantism. They're going to be led out. They're going to be given the writings of the prophet through the prophets. For ancient Israel, that continues to be Moses. So Moses was both the messenger and the prophet, and he is going to reinstitute the Sabbath. We're led out of apostate Protestantism by 1844. There is a prophet. This is Ellen White. She will have a Sabbath vision, and they will reinstitute the Sabbath. So we see the compare and contrast here. With a parable, we are to compare and contrast. So we see ancient Israel and modern Israel, and Brother Brandon spoke this morning about parable teaching. When we understand the rules of parable teaching, we understand that we are to compare and to contrast. I just want us to think about that for a moment. So comparing and contrasting is very important. So what are the comparisons between ancient and modern Israel? We've already listed some. What I want to suggest is that the comparison between the two things, usually when you come to a parable, the comparison that you make is in the structure. You can see darkness, captivity, and the loss of the Sabbath, the raising up of a messenger, a leader. There's going to be a coming out of Egypt, and there's going to come out of apostate Protestantism. A prophet will be given the writings of Moses. He will reinstitute the Sabbath, which he was told directly from God to do so. Ellen White becomes a prophet. She has her Sabbath vision, and the Sabbath is reinstituted. They came out of Egypt, and they were to go into the promised land. They could have done a work immediately. There wasn't a need for a long delay, and we're going to go back and see the mistakes they made in that history. We know that they made these fundamental mistakes. So coming back to Egypt, they come out of Egypt, they're in the wilderness, and what do? Apostasy, the history of the golden calf. So just to give the structure again, there's a failure in the wilderness as they come out of Egypt. And because of their failure throughout this history, we'll discuss two of them. They go into captivity to Babylon. They come out of Babylon seemingly cured of idolatry, and we'll discuss the failures in that history. Then they go into captivity to Rome. The issues they face are their repeating failures. Failure, and finally, at the end, success. The Alpha history is one of failure, and the Omega history is one of success. It's the exact same pattern of modern Israel. We've already identified last week in the quotes in Evangelism that Christ should have come back by 1868. Brother Brandon spoke this morning that Christ could not return until after 1798. So sometime between 1798 and 1868, in those 70 years, he should have been able to return. He couldn't. It was delayed. This was an Alpha history, a history of failure. He should have returned by 1868 within that 70 years. Any comments? Then we have this history of 1888. Again, the third angel's message was crying. Sunday laws were already in the United States. Everything had been set up, but God's people just had to be ready for it. They weren't. It was a history of failure. So we know that we are in the Omega history, the history of success. Okay, shall we take a break? These are vegan sandwiches, by the way.
This was a really good study, good review. Really thankful for it.
Yes, very good. I was very blessed by doing it too. I was like, oh.
I totally am, by putting together the transcribing and putting them together. It helps it to be more solid in my mind, to where I can, and it's like little by little, it's all the different lines. I don't have them all set, but it helps to merge all these things in our minds, or, as we continue to do our review.
Yep.
They had this little elderly lady on one of the news feedbacks. They had 4 or 5 people up there. And she was a historian. And I was totally shocked because she backed what we had said. She said, the bottom line to this, the bottom line to the people with all this hatred, make America great again. She says, there's not another country that is greater. But they want to make it white again. Well, she said, that's the trouble, because white again, it never was white. It was taken from people of color, Native Americans.
Yeah.
So she said, that's a big problem. But these people are all pro that. That's throw them back into the shackles. That's throw some of the immigrant Hispanics into shackles with them. And that will make America great. That is their mind thought. That's what this lady said. I'm like, this lady was very smart. An historian, a nice little elderly lady. Mm-hmm. And she had those points down to the exact problem. They're racist. It's racism.
It is. It's amazing reading those articles by Jared Goldstein, and then also listening to the evangelicals. I mean, I had no idea there was so many people involved with so much of wanting this nation to be a white Christian nation.
I know. I didn't either.
I just never knew how big it was, but
I didn't either.
Those articles are eye-opening that it's always been that mindset.
Yeah.
To be a white Christian nation and not to let anybody else in because they would damage.
And you know, it's so funny because I was looking, I told my husband, you know, these white, you know, Christian patriots, so I don't know, people. And, you know, I look at them and they're saying, you know, the voice, our voice isn't heard. And, you know, we need to, you know, stand up, and we're patriots and we're real patriots in America. I think there was, you know, if we just gave this guy a job. I mean, these people just, I think they see all of America, which in all its colors, prospering. And they're back in, you know, their little wood place, wherever they're at. They're not participating with that prosperity, you know, that prosperity because of their own foolishness, their own mindset. They just need a job, you know? I mean, if this guy, I said, if this guy had a job and that was, you know, taking care of his family, he wouldn't be doing this. He wouldn't.
Yeah, and poor Antifa got thrown into it. The FBI report as late as yesterday at 6 o'clock, there was zero participation by Antifa. They didn't find one Antifa person. Well, you had the Ku Klux Klan, you had everybody else, but that identified. The guy that went and sit on Pelosi's desk identified he was not Antifa, but this lady out there, oh, it's Antifa. They infiltrated and caused all this. Yeah, right.
He said who he was. He said in an article I read that he's been quoted saying he is a white nationalist.
Yeah.
He was arrested, by the way.
Yeah.
Yep, that's not Antifa. Ain't found one yet.
So yeah, well, I pray we're all ready. Let's close for lunch, close in prayer. Sister Donna, why don't you close us in prayer for lunch?
Okay, yes. Heavenly Father, thank you so much, Lord, for this wonderful blessing of time of study and fellowship and dialogue and just worshiping you, Lord, and all your magnificence and your prophecies, that we can actually see your prophetic hand right before our eyes. We see hearts and minds being pierced, Lord. They're being convicted in their soul. It's a beautiful thing. And we know, Lord, that there's some hardliners out there, and we know that their hearts have not been pricked, but we know that there's always hope, no matter who you are. And we pray, no matter who they are, where they are, whether they're President Trump or whoever, that you would continue to work on them. You did it with Nebuchadnezzar, and he wrote Daniel 4, chapter 4. I think it was chapter 4. And I mean, it's amazing, Lord, what you can do. There's nothing you can't do. So we just give you all the glory, we give you all the praise, Lord. And we thank you for this time getting together. And this is our church. This is our family. This is where we come together. This is where we talk about our problems and we get nourishment. This is where we get consoled, and we get an online hug. And we just thank you for all this platform that we're able to do this. And we pray for the food and the hands that made the food. And we pray people will be nourished. Pray for those who are sick and ill, and family members that are fighting or bickering. And we pray all these things that would be just taken away, Lord. That the most important things would be front and center in our lives. Thank you, and give you all the praise. And in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Very nice.